You've reached Bill Martinez Live.
14 minutes before the top of the hour. In light of Hurricane Matthew, which went through, and I got to tell you, here in Port St. Lucie, Florida, we were very blessed and very fortunate. Even though there were something like 30,000 homes that went without electricity, there were some, broken trees and a little bit of flooding. Quite the big difference than what happened up north of us, and certainly in the Carolinas. But one of the things that kind of galled me, and you got to love environmentalists because they can't help themselves. I say environmentalists, and I would say those are the global warming advocates who just had to come out right away. You can't let a good crisis go to waste. So let's blame Hurricane Matthew on global warming. Well, Tom Harris, he's an executive director of the International Climate Science Coalition, is here to bring some reason to the discussion and help us understand, Tom, what is going on. I mean, the left, thinks that this is something millennials will be all over, and we'll get them all excited because it touches their pea-picking hearts a little bit here.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Al Gore was shown to kids in movies now in school for 15 years. I mean, my daughters are in their 20s, and they were forced to watch the Al Gore movie, An Inconvenient Truth, 3 times in their high school career. Oh, yeah. So I guess Hillary Clinton figures that if you bring in Al Gore, you're going to suddenly get all these people aligning with her. The thing is, though, while the Hurricane Matthew was obviously very serious, it's certainly not unusual. In fact, the strongest hurricane on record was Typhoon Tip. They call them typhoons in the Western Pacific, but they're the same thing. They're hurricanes. And that occurred 37 years ago. That was well before recent temperature rise. And, if you actually look at the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they've said twice now in their 2012 report and again in 2013 that there doesn't seem to be any relationship between global warming and hurricanes. Okay, so, and in fact, if you look at the data, and this is what we encourage the millennials to do, is to actually look at the data. What you find is that during a cooling period from 1945 to 1977, there were as many extreme weather events as there are now. So, in fact, the data simply doesn't back up the idea that either A, hurricanes are increasing, or B, that global warming is the cause.
Mm-hmm. Tom, I guess, I'm of the mindset that when somebody, and I'm a kind of old school, that says, if you get somebody who prophesies or says something that is not true, then they need to be marginalized. Back in the old days, they would just take them out and kill them. I'm not saying that, okay? So don't get excited. But I'm just saying is that you need to understand. But unfortunately, Al Gore and his ilk live another day, and they just keep bringing back the same lie over and over again. Well, if it was a lie the first time, it's going to be a lie the second time or the third time. And it just galls me that the Democrats continue to parade people who misserve the American public with this false information.
Yeah, and it's pretty obscene to take advantage of a disaster like Hurricane Matthew to promote your political agenda. I mean, they should be focusing on helping people adapt to what's happened, but to try to say that, okay, we can somehow magically stop these, all we have to do is reduce greenhouse gases. I mean, those kinds of statements are really, really, they're ridiculous and they're opportunistic, and they don't match with the data on other extreme weather events either. I know that this is being broadcast across the world, but internationally, people should know that you can actually go onto the NOAA.gov website, that's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and you can see when all the extreme weather records were set for every state in the Union. And Florida, for example, had its maximum temperature in 1931. Its minimum temperature in 1899. And so what you find is if you go across the states, there's been no increase in extreme weather of any kind. And in fact, it's interesting. If you actually had no increase or decrease in extreme weather, with 50 states and 5 to 6, sometimes 7 records set, like the largest hailstone, most rain, highest temperature, you'd expect on average there would be 3 state records set every year. Exactly. But in 2015 there were none. In 2014 there was 1, 2013 1, 2012 1. So what you find is you have to go back to the 1930s to find when extreme weather records were set at a high rate. So, that was the main point of Al Gore and Ms. Clinton's statements yesterday or 2 days ago on Tuesday when they were speaking in Miami. They were pointing to extreme weather, including drought and things like that, as being caused by global warming. And yet the records just don't show that.
Well, these are the same people that tell everybody. I mean, my 92-year-old mother's in California, and of course she's hearing the news, and you get people saying, well, they're bringing body bags. Your children are going to die. You know, my mother's 92 years old. What does she know? I mean, we're in California. I mean, we grew up with earthquakes. We didn't know about hurricanes, and this was my first hurricane that I went through, and of course, go figure, it's a Cat 4. But, you know, the way the media was presenting this, I think was, grossly irresponsible on their part.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting that there are many, many scientific experts that Gore and Clinton just simply ignore. We started something called the Climate Scientist Register, and we wanted to make it as simple as possible, and we wanted to have it totally nonpartisan so that we can attract scientists who are left-wing, right-wing, and nonpartisan. And here's the statement. In 2010, by the way, we attracted over 100 experts within 2 or 3 days to this statement. We, the undersigned, having assessed the relevant scientific evidence, do not find convincing support for the hypothesis that human emissions of carbon dioxide are causing or will in the foreseeable future cause dangerous global warming. Now that is pretty well the most simple statement that was ever signed by people on our side of the debate. I mean, there's hundreds of other lists and open letters and things like that, but this one is dead simple. It's not left-wing, right-wing, and in fact, we have socialists signing this. People who actually believe that there should be more government taxation on energy systems and there should be a lot more social support. And that's fine. They can have that point of view, but they simply don't think that carbon dioxide is the cause of dangerous global warming.
Well, Tom, the people on the left coast are upset with you because you didn't include cows there, because Jerry Brown just signed, a bill saying that we got to keep an eye on the hyperfenation of cows, you know.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, the sad thing is that many on the left seem to feel that if they set an example, if the United States sets an example and massively cuts back on your greenhouse gas emissions, that the developing world will follow. But what they don't seem to realize is that in all of the treaties, all the UN treaties, they're based on something called the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And it says point blank, it says that poverty alleviation and development is their first and overriding priority, not greenhouse gas reduction. So if you're telling them to turn off their cheapest form of electricity, which in most of the countries is coal-fired power, in the name of stopping climate change, they just will not do it. And we already had a preview. I know he's not the greatest person to cite, but President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines, here's what he said when he was pushed by a foreign leader just recently about the Paris Climate Agreement. He said, quote, "You are trying to stymie our growth with an agreement. That's stupid. I will not honor that." So what's happening here is we're really getting into another Kyoto Protocol where most of the world's emissions, which of course comes from developing countries, will not be reduced, and we'll be doing it for nothing.
Right, exactly. Well, people do that which they get rewarded for it, and they know that they've got to keep the minions quiet, and they've got to stay focused there, or they're not going to be in office long. And here in the United States, you know, we're like Don Quixote chasing windmills. Now, there could be some foundation to all this, but this has got to be a process. It wasn't like America woke up one day and said, hey, we're going to be energy efficient. And, you know, all we've heard all our growing up lives was that it was about energy independence. Now we have the first chance ever in our history to be energy independent, and the very thing that brought us to the dance we want to malign and kick it out of Dodge here.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, people have to realize that across the world, 1.2 billion people lack access to electricity. In South Africa, they applied to the World Bank to get a loan to build what would be, or what will be, the fourth largest coal station in the world. And, you know, it's interesting because the United States and several European countries would not support the loan because they were afraid of climate change. It took all the developing countries ganging up and voting in support of the loan for the developing world to actually get the loan. And they did, and the station will be ready. Actually, some of it's come online already. So, you know, the sad thing is the West is putting more importance on the possibility of future climate change caused by us than they are on helping these 1.2 billion people get electricity.
Exactly. How can President Obama say it's a fact? I mean, it's not even a scientific term, but he says it's a fact. You know, global warming is a fact. How can he say that?
Well, he can't really, because our grid of temperature sensing stations across the world is much too sparse to even know what's going on now. You know, NASA says that we have 80% of the world covered with temperature sensing stations, but if you look closely, their definition of being covered is that there's a temperature sensing station within 1,200 kilometers.
Oh, wow.
That's incredible.
Yes.
I mean, that's a distance from southern Norway to Greece.
Yes.
And according to NASA, if you have one temperature sensing station in that 1,200 kilometers, that part of the Earth is covered. So the fact is, the data is so sparse. I mean, major parts of the ocean and the Arctic. I mean, there's an area in the Arctic of the world the size of Russia that has no temperature sensing stations at all. Okay, and the whole interior virtually of Antarctica, which is as big as the continental U.S., it has no temperature sensing stations. So the truth is, we really don't know what's going on even now, let alone the future.
Well, we need to keep the conversation going, and Tom, we appreciate you coming on the show and keeping us informed. Look forward to having you back and keeping us up to date. Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. This is Bill Martinez. We're live. It's just about a couple of minutes before the top of the hour. We've got more coming up. Remember, for more information on the show, go to BillMartinezLive.com.